Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're watching this. But it's Talkin really, and here we have 6 election-based stories that will shock you. It's time to give you 6 stories that will shock. And these are all related to the coming election because they are related to the policies that the various parties are going to be putting in place when they get in power, if they get in power. So, story number 1, we have election 2019. 100,000 people have lost mobility vehicles through the Tory PIP reforms. So, more than 100,000 people have lost their cars after being reassessed as part of the disability benefit reforms. This is a number of people who have had to return their vehicle after being assessed and reduced or no benefit whatsoever. The figures were revealed after the former Minister for Disabled People, Maria Miller, was accused of lying about the government's introduction of PIP when she was taking part in a local election hustings event in Basingstoke. Miller was the Conservative Minister for Disabled People between May 2010 and September 2012 and steered through the early stages of the very unpopular and controversial replacement for DLA. It was eventually introduced in April 2013. The PIP reassessment process has been blamed for causing years of distress and making it harder for many to access work, leisure and independent living opportunities, since Tory Chancellor George Osborne announced in 2010 that the government planned to cut the 1.8 million people claiming DLA by 20%. Disabled campaigners repeatedly warned in the years after it was introduced that the decision to tighten a key eligibility criterion, which was the ability to walk less than 50 metres under DLA to under 20 metres under PIP, was having a significant and serious impact on disabled people's independence. Obviously then there was allegations of dishonesty by PIP assessors in late 2016 and through 17, hearing eventually from more than 250 people in less than a year about how they've been unfairly deprived of their benefits, with cases taking up to 2 years to go to tribunal. PIP claimants are now almost twice as likely to win their tribunal appeal than DLA claimants were almost a decade ago. Story number 2. Tories offer just 5 new disability policies in their pledge, their manifesto. The party manifesto is silent on a range of issues, which I did that video the other day. So with no mention of disability rights or how Bojo will meet its obligations to implement the UN Convention on the Rights for Disabled People. Tory governments have been repeatedly criticised by the UN for breaches of the rights of disabled people. 2 years ago, the UN committee told the government to make more than 80 improvements to the ways of its laws and policies affect disabled people's rights. The committee raised concerns and made recommendations on all but 3 of the 33 articles it could have breached. But there is no mention of the UNCRPD, the UNCRPD, in the manifesto of the government's duty to achieve progressive implementation of the treaty. Although the government has previously insisted that it has made significant progress on rights and was committed to building a society which is fully inclusive of disabled people. The UN committee also accused the UK of going backwards on independent living in 2017, but again the party has failed to suggest a long-term plan to solve the social care funding crisis. And story number 3 is related to that one. Bojo backtracks on promised social care plan. So we mentioned the social care just now. So he has refused to offer any long-term solution to the social care crisis, despite insisting that when he becomes Prime Minister, he had a clear plan for doing so. Instead, the party has offered only future discussions to build a cross-party consensus on reform. Only last month, a Tory cabinet minister admitted that there was not even consensus within the government on how to solve the adult social care funding crisis. The manifesto only offers a $1 billion a year extra to fund the system in England for the year 22, 23 and 24. The King's Fund said that this extra funding is not enough to meet rising demand for care. The Tory manifesto says that in any long-term plan will have to ensure that nobody needing care should be forced to sell their home to pay for it. When asked how the party justified further delays, what has happened to Johnson's clear plan and whether the manifesto was a breach of promise when he became Prime Minister, the party repeated the policies laid out in the manifesto. Story number 4. Okay, so you remember we mentioned earlier a Tory minister for disabled people from May 2010 to September 2012, Maria Miller, lied twice to voters on Tory DLA reforms. On Monday, Miller came up against a Labour opponent and in an event which was organised by Basingstoke Gazette. Marchant told the audience that the government's introduction of PIP had led to tighter eligibility, so that disabled people who could walk more than 20 metres were no longer eligible for the upper rate and therefore being eligible for Motability. Maria Miller was one of the ministers for disabled people who changed DLA to PIP, and when you transfer to PIP, if you can walk more than 20 metres, you lose your Motability vehicle. And now, it's actually 101,000 people have lost their Motability vehicle. But Miller claimed in response that Marchant was wrong, and the higher rate of mobility for DLA was actually designed for people who couldn't walk at all. This is not correct. Disabled people could be eligible for DLA upper rate if they could walk a short distance, less than 50 metres, without severe discomfort. It was not only for those who cannot walk at all. Miller then also tried to claim that DLA had been the biggest benefit in the department when she was minister. This is also not correct. The biggest benefit at the time was housing benefit, for which spending was nearly twice as high as for DLA. Miller told the audience that she was really proud to have been Minister for Disabled People. Also claimed that it had been civil servants who asked ministers to reform DLA, a claim that does not appear to have been made public before. Miller made no mention of civil servants before asking for the benefit to be reformed, stressing that instead she believed herself the time is right for reforming DLA. Earlier that year, George Osborne had announced that the government would cut the 1.8 million by 20% by 2016. It is worrying that she was a Minister for Disabled People who was responsible for changing the benefit to another, but didn't understand the benefit. People's lives have been ruined by the decision. They have lost their independence, their ability to go out of their homes, to go to work, to visit town centres for leisure. They have become prisoners in their own homes. Linda Burnip, who is the co-founder of Disabled People Against Cuts, went further and said Miller had lied. She said, "I can remember challenging Miller about the scrapping of DLA, and her glib response was that people were always frightened of change. She made it quite clear that the aim of the changes was to remove 20% of claimants from entitlement to PIP, and at the time was saying that disabled people didn't need to bathe every day. To now make these totally inaccurate statements and try to blame civil servants for her cruel actions simply shows what an outright liar she is." Neither Miller nor the Conservative Party had responded to requests for a comment by noon about this story. Story number 5. The Brexit Party ignores disabled people in manifesto contract. With the election manifesto out now, there's not a single mention of disabled people in it. Now, they obviously call it a contract rather than a manifesto. Provides almost no details of any policies. Despite the lack of detail, its housing policy appears to be designed to aggravate the accessible housing crisis. The manifesto says that party would simplify the planning and development processes. This would appear to be a call to make it easier for developers to build more homes that are not accessible for disabled people. The party has refused to clarify whether this means that it wants to make it harder for authorities to insist on how many new homes would be accessible. It also refused to say how it would address the accessible housing crisis. On social care, the party says that it will keep investing in the essential and treasured public service without offering any suggestion for how much investment or how it would reform the system. There was also a pledge to introduce a new nursing qualification in social care. On the subject of UC, it's not achieved what it's intended and needs to be revisited. It claims that it wants to see a accelerated payment process, which would be a 5-week maximum, but that's exactly what it is at the moment. And the party says it would carry out a 12-month review of UC and bring in reforms within 2 years, without suggesting what it would be. It says it would support those who have paid into the system, but fails to explain if this means there are other claimants that it would not support. So the last story today about the election is this one. Lib Dems copied their disability policies from their last manifesto. The DNS reported that the party had refused to explain why it had omitted disabled people from key measures. Now, nearly 2 weeks after the Equalities Manifesto was published, the party has tried to provide further clarity, but it's only succeeded in revealing that it has copied several of its policies word for word from its 2017 manifesto. So this one is about discrimination in private hire vehicles. So these two paragraphs here, 2017 and the 2019. The party has been unable to so far to explain why the measure of benchmarking would be necessary when all buses now have to be wheelchair accessible under the Equality Act, which obviously is another story that you'll find on this channel. Meanwhile, the party said that it wanted to ensure that all major rail stations with step-free access are staffed from first to last trains to ensure that there is always assistance on hand for passengers who need it. And obviously in smaller stations, they want to ensure that guards are on trains so that they can help when available. Staff should be trained on how to use ramps that allow wheelchair users onto trains. It also says that disability would be included in measures to force all large companies with more than 250 employees to monitor and publish data on gender, BAME, whatever that is, and LGBT employment levels and pay gaps. If you know what BAME is, then post it down below. The party has blamed a typo for the failure to include disability in its original manifesto pledge. And it says this was now being amended in the online versions of it. The party also admitted that it should have included disabled children and young people in its plans to address bullying in schools, in addition to bullying on the basis of gender, sexuality, gender identity or gender expression, which has been an illustrative rather than an exhaustive list. It also appears to have admitted that it should have added people with mental health conditions and learning difficulties. It said it would also invest in education to help people with learning difficulties and bring in measures to minimise school exclusions. Well, there you go. That is 6 election-based stories that will shock. No surprises, really. So there we go. Very long vlog. Sorry about that. I'll catch you again. Bye for now.